Chapter 11, Many Questions, Few Answers. Holy Land of Lunas, 337 solar year. Ishan, the Oracle of Lunas, was charged with protecting and preserving this sacred land known to all Phalanans. For the first queen had descended from these very mountains with the sun rune in hand centuries ago to create this now mighty nation. Moreover, Ishan felt doubly obligated to do justice to his high position. One reason being that to be chosen as the oracle of this chief religious center was one of the highest and most honored positions in the Quendom that one could obtain. The second reason being that he, himself, was a descendant of the first queen. In fact, he was the older brother to the current queen, Elamark. Had he been born a prince in another nation such as Scarlet Moon, Highland, or even Armis, he would be a king right now, but he was born in the Quendom of Fulena, where the male royal family members serve more ceremonial or figurehead-type roles. Very few men had ever managed to break out of this ceremonial role and accomplish anything noteworthy of fame or political attention. However, this didn't bother Ishan. He had become content in his role of years ago, and when his sister, the queen, offered him the lifetime appointment of oracle, he was quite taken aback and had almost refused it. But after some convincing, he took the role that had now been his for nearly 15 years. Having lost both his wife and unborn son during childbirth, he never remarried. Thus, having no children of his own, Uncle Ishan had always been exceptionally protective and exceedingly kind to his two nieces, Alinda and Syra, as though they were his own children. So when Alinda showed up surprisingly at his doorstep with a strange foreign man and an unconscious Queen's Knight, he was deeply troubled in spirit. It was now nearly noon. Alinda had hardly slept a wink since arriving in Lunas the previous evening. She had been by Rose's side nearly the whole time. It was only after her uncle and the local healers had insisted she eat something and go to bed, as there was nothing more that she could do for her friend right now, that she finally left Rose's side. Passing out only from sheer exhaustion at around midnight, but was back up at nearly the crack of dawn. The princess still hadn't left her side all morning. The chief healer walked into the room. My, you're still here, Your Highness? I hoped you slept last night. Be sure you eat something too. I don't want to have two patients on my hands now, he said in a stern, but respectful, tone. He glanced over to the table at the tray of cold and nearly uneaten breakfast a servant had obviously placed there for her hours ago. Reaching his hand on a sleeping Rose's forehead, checking for a fever, he then proceeded to check the rest of her vitals. Alinda, watching him closely, said in a soft tone, "How is she?" "Well, I am not going to lie. I still don't know how she even survived after the ordeal you described last night. The effects of that poison that the boy you traveled with described, I've never heard of anything like it. However, with that said, that antidote you found seems to have truly worked. The toxins have almost completely left her system. In addition, whatever healing runic magic was used, it was truly powerful. Her wounds from the blades and needle tips were healed almost perfectly. Even the pulled muscle tissue from when she stood up to shield you has been restored to its natural state. Incredible, if I do say so myself. No common rune could do this. It would have to be one of extraordinary power. What was it, a flowing or cyclone rune?" A moment of silence filled the room. Then it occurred to Alinda, who had been just watching Rose's breathing, her chest rising and falling in seemingly normal rhythm now, suddenly was pulled back to reality. "I am sorry," she replied, half listening. "Rune?" The older man now smiled and restated his question. "Do you know the healing rune that man used? Was it a cyclone or flowing?" Alinda thought about it for a moment. She herself didn't know what rune Laszlo had used, but she knew it wasn't one of those kinds. "I am sorry. I am not really sure." Before she could finish her sentence, Rose awoke from her slumber. "Rose!" Alinda exclaimed in an excited whisper-like tone. "Princess? Where am I?" asked the groggy red-headed knight. Alinda had started to drop tears of delight at hearing her best friend's voice again. "So," the older doctor spoke up, "you are in Lunas, dear. You were injured and brought here last night after that harrowing ordeal you had on our southern forest path. Likewise, before he could finish his explanation, Rose shot up out of bed, her senses catching up with her as she finally remembered the previous day's events. The doctor, immediately, took her by the shoulders and pushed her back down on the bed. He said in a serious cadence, "Dear, your body was terribly injured and is still weak. You must not move like that. Stay in bed. Recover your strength." Rose had sat up so fast, she instantly grew dizzy. So after falling back down on her pillow after the old healer had pushed on her shoulders, she was not about to resist. The doctor then placed his hand on her forehead to check her temperature. Then, grabbed her wrist again to check the woman's pulse. He concluded, "Yes, indeed you are lucky to be alive. Between that antidote and that man's healing rune you should be just fine in another day or so. Just get lots of rest and don't do anything too physical for a week or so, and I imagine you'll be 100% in no time, my lady." With that he bowed to the princess and took his leave of them, figuring the two young women wanted to be alone right now. As the door closed behind him, Alinda was first to speak up. "Oh Rose, I am glad you're okay. Thank the sun." Rose smiled, "Me too. You saved my life yesterday, Rose. I don't even know how to express my gratitude," added the princess. The tired knight answered her, "I was just doing my job. I swore an oath to Her Majesty Queen Elimark and Commander Alan that I would give my life, if needed, to protect you. That's always been my promise to them and to you. Besides, I wouldn't be much of a queen's knight if I had let those ninja rejects lay one finger on you." Memories of yesterday's events came flooding back to Rose like a tsunami. She had to stop talking for a few minutes to catch her breath and regain her composure, not wanting another dizzy spell from trying to sit up again. She merely took the silver-haired woman's small and soft hand into her own, and asked quietly, like telling a secret, "What happened? I mean, after I passed out. All I remember is your face. Then darkness. I remember Sir Laszlo saying to get you to Luna's. But, Sir Laszlo? Is he okay? Wait, did he defeat all those thugs by himself? More came out of hiding from the treetops, right? Then, he started doing something to stop them? What happened?" All these questions Rose kept asking again and again with great anxiety, as though she needed answers too, or else she would not be able to stop herself. Alinda thought for a moment she wasn't sure what to tell her dear friend. Because she had decided in her heart in bed last night that she didn't want to tell anyone about what had happened until she got more answers to her own questions first. That meant she needed to talk to Laszlo. She wanted to know what kind of angelic creature was that thing that he summoned with his strange rune, which he seemed to bear in his left hand. That horribly figured, but extremely powerful, angel had healed the three of them of their injuries. In addition, it had filled her whole being with such warmth and peace like she had never known before. Not only had this awesome magic healed them, but it also unleashed a devastating wave of power that had obliterated the remaining assassins. What kind of secrets and strange magic powers did this seemingly young man from a foreign land possess? Was this type of power common in the island nations? Did others possess it too? Or was he somehow unique? These were the questions now storming in Alinda's mind. Thus, as she had been evasive with the doctor, she was now doing the same with Rose. Only she did give her friend a bit more information, saying, "After you collapsed, Sir Laszlo got pretty mad. No, mad isn't the right word, determined maybe. Yes, very determined. I guess he had a cyclone rune or something," she lied, "because his magic was pretty powerful. Maybe it was a shining wind spell or something. Because it not only healed us, but destroyed those bad guys too." She felt bad about lying, but would Rose have believed her if she had told her the truth? Which was that a giant headless and partly limbless angelic being had appeared, and then proceeded to heal them as well as kill the Nethergate warriors. No, she thought for now this will do. Until she has more facts herself from Laszlo, she'll leave her story at that. Shining wind? Really, that's like the highest level of magical power in the Wind Rune family. Just to meet someone with a Cyclone Rune is rare enough, but to be strong enough to use that magical attack. Sir Laszlo must be a very strong mage as well as being an amazing sword master, cited the Queen's Knight. Now in a normal and more jovial tone Rose said, not only is he amazingly toned and good looking, but, oh my word, all those prodigious abilities. I bet he's skilled in more ways than just with swords and spells. At this provocative remark, Alinda started to blush a little. I wonder. Do you suppose he's single? Once I am feeling better and more physical, I really do need to tell him. No, rather show him my own personal gratitude for saving my life. Hee hee. At these last few words, Alinda grew a bit embarrassed, stunned, shocked, indignant, and maybe even a little bit jealous all at the same time by her bodyguard's implications. Seeing how many shades of red and pink Alinda's face began turning, Rose placed her hands over her face and began giggling to herself. She did manage to stop between the laughter to let Alinda know that if she were any more flush with color, her face would soon be as red as Rose's hair. Well, I see you're feeling better. Your teasing is just too much right now. Here I was worrying sick about you all night and then you go and say things like that just to get me worked up. Shame on you. Alinda retorted. Apologetically, the knight responded back, Oh princess, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I know you were very worried about me. I was only joking. I know you and Sir Laszlo have. Rose was unable to finish her sentence as it was now Alinda that was laughing out loud. Now who is getting tricked by the other's words and getting all worked up over nothing? Asked the Falanin royal sarcastically. With this both women started giggling and embraced each other warmly. After they had finished hugging, as though on cue, the door opened and standing there was Laszlo and Ishan. Hope we are not disrupting you two. But the doctor said Rose was awake and we just had to come see her, said the aged clergyman with a rather dignified and compassionate tone. Uncle Ishan, yelled Alinda calmly, please come in. We've missed you so much. Yes, Rose is awake and she's going to be just fine too. She finished with a great smile beaming across her lovely face. Rose glanced at the two men standing in the doorway and then back at the princess and couldn't help but notice her great big smile seemed to be directed more at the brown-haired man standing next to her grey-hair uncle than anyone else in the room. And if she didn't know any better she thought that, maybe, perhaps Laszlo had returned that smile with one of his own, only much smaller with a touch of incognito. The oracle approached the girls and placed his hand on Rose's shoulder in a fatherly and empathetic sort of way asking her, How are you feeling, dear? Better, responded Rose, who was now starting to look tired again. Well, I guess I am not quite there yet. Yes, indeed, you need your rest. We shall take our leave and let you get some sleep. When you wake up I'll have my cook bring you a very special meal. You'll be back to smacking around those guys with your nunchucks in no time. Yes, sir, indeed, in no time at all, concluded Ishan. Standing back up to his full height, he, Alinda, and Laszlo, who had never really left the doorway, proceeded into the hallway closing the door behind them. As they started walking down the hallway toward the other end, Ishan, again, spoke up in his authoritative, but concerning, voice, Now Alinda, I don't want you getting all bent out of shape over this. She'll be fine, but you need to eat something. I was told by my servant that you haven't had anything to eat really since you arrived here last night. There is no way I am going to be the one to tell my sister that her lovely daughter starved to death while in my care. Now I've had the chef prepare you and Ambassador Laszlo a very delicious lunch. Come, we shall eat together and you can tell me all the things that have been happening at the palace as of late. He continued speaking, Oh, I did send a messenger to East Palace informing them that you were here and would be so for a few more days. Alinda's face suddenly contorted into one of worry. Not failing to notice this, Ishan reassured her with these words. Don't fret. I didn't mention the severity of the battle you had fought. only that some rogue bandits tried to rob you, but that Rose quickly disposed of them, and that was all. In addition, I told them that I had invited you and Sir Laszlo here as my personal guests. Since foreigners aren't normally allowed here, but did so as an attempt to help negotiations by showing one of the ambassadors the beauty of our queendom." Alinda was speechless. Her uncle had thought of everything. He had covered for their secret trip up to Luna's, the failed kidnapping of Alinda, even the slightly illegal presence of Laszlo in the most holy landmark in all of Falena. Speaking in more hushed tones, so as to avoid eavesdroppers as they turned the corner of the hallway, he said, "I figured it was best if you told your father and the other knights privately about the incident in the woods. Sir Laszlo told me about the battle. And from what he described of those men and how they dressed and fought, they must have been Nethergate. A group of highly trained assassins that report directly to only the highest and most powerful priests in the Nagara theocracy. I watched them fight in the last war once. I saw a single assassin skilled enough to take out about 10 of our soldiers alone before he was finally defeated by Sir Gress, who had intervened on his men's behalf. The fact that you, looking at Laszlo, and Rose held off as many as you did. Remarkable. You said, Sir Laszlo, you had some training as a knight in Rosral when you were younger. Well, you must have had some truly gifted instructors," he added. Laszlo said nothing, he merely nodded his head in agreement. The oracle went on, "Regardless, if this was indeed Nethergate acting on behalf of one, or all four, of the great high priests from the Order of Tessers that rule Nagara, then, this would be a clear violation of the treaty. Not to mention, attempting to kidnap a member of the royal family might as well be an open declaration of war. No, we can't have that information getting out right now to the general public. Plus, who knows what would happen to the talks between us and the island nations if they knew one of their ambassadors had been suddenly and mysteriously killed. Your parents need to know the truth, Alinda. I want you to tell them the truth once you go back to the East Palace." He had finished speaking just in time as they had arrived to the dining room table. Sure enough, there was a huge plethora of delicious-smelling foods waiting for them. After everyone had had their fill and having time to rest a bit, the oracle told them one more piece of confidential information. That he had sent some of the clerics back to the battlefield to bury the dead assassins earlier that morning. However, when they got there, the remaining bodies that had not been evaporated by Laszlo's runic magic were gone. Their bodies had disappeared without a trace. The clerics saw no new footprints of people or beast coming to carrying the corpses off. It was as if they had just vanished into thin air. This news didn't sit well with Laszlo or Alinda, neither could make much sense of it. Later that afternoon, seeing Alinda sitting on a couch and looking out a window up at the waterfall behind the compound, the two men approached her and Ishan spoke up, "My dear niece, instead of just looking at the outside, why don't you go out there? Plus, I doubt our island nation ambassador has had a tour of the grounds yet. Why don't you go show him around?" Alinda was about to speak in protest, but her uncle cut her off. "When Rose wakes up, I'll let you know. Besides, I am sure Master Laszlo wants to go outside too. Well, I would like to take a look around. Like you said before, non-Falenans almost never get to check this place out. I really don't want to waste this rare opportunity," added the former Prince of Obel. She acquiesced. In truth, as much as she wanted to stay close by for Rose, she also wanted to talk with Laszlo, alone, even more so. Thus, after a simple adieu to her uncle, she and Laszlo left the main compound and started on a small tour off the grounds. Neither said anything to one another for the first few moments of their walk, even though both had questions they wanted to ask each other. Laszlo about the First Queen and the Sun Rune, and Alinda with her questions about his own rune. The problem was neither knew how to start off the conversation. Eventually, the awkward silence was first broken by Laszlo, who asked about the room that was behind the waterfall and what it was used for. Princess Alinda responded, "I think that is where the future queens go for their purification rites just before their sacred games are held. Syra just had hers a few months ago. So, she probably got to go inside for the ritual. She's lucky, I've never gotten to go inside, myself, nor will I ever most likely. So, you won't ever be going in yourself? Don't you get a Sacred Games as well? Laszlo inquired. No, the Sacred Games is only for the princess next in line for the throne, hence Syra. And the winner of the games will become the queen's husband and the next commander of the queen's knights. Thus, in Syra's case the winner was Marcus Godwin. That seems like a strange custom, especially for picking a person who will have such an important role in government. With some surprise in her voice she replied, Really? Strange? You think so? It's always seemed normal to me. I guess people from other lands think many customs and beliefs are unusual when they visit new countries. Laszlo smiled, Haha, you know you're right. When I was visiting the city-states they did the strangest thing at mealtime. A puzzled look overtook the fair maiden's face. City-states? What's that? Oh, the city-state of Jouston, said the former Gaian knight. It's a small country on the northern continent. It has a lake in the middle of it and some rivers divide up different regions. As such, it's pretty green like your country with many forests, plains, and mountains. Fascinating. I've never heard of such a place. It sounds lovely though. I'd like to see it someday, said Alindo as the two seemed to be walking up the hill toward the waterfall behind the compound. Neither had suggested they go this way, it just seemed to be that's the way their walking took them as they chatted more about other nations. I am not surprised you had not heard of it. Heck, I really didn't know much about the city-states either until I visited it a few years ago. They're sort of a new nation, only a few decades old, like my own island nations. In fact, I think it was about 5 years or so after me, Desmond, and Tanya had finished fighting in the island's liberation war, that the city-states, themselves, were formed. At least I think so if I am remembering what that old barkeep was telling me while I was there, stated Laszlo with a sort of nostalgic tone. They had made their way up the path next to the top of the waterfall. After taking in its beauty for a few moments, they continued walking further upstream. Laszlo asked her, What is further up the path? A dead end, I think, but I do remember hearing stories growing up from my father and Uncle Ishan that beyond those trees that there is supposedly a secret path that leads to an ancient elf village called Alcid. But I think it's just a myth. A story. They used to keep me and Rose from wandering off when we were kids. Well, it would not surprise me if there were some elves on this continent too. We have a small group of them in the island nations and I have met some on the North Continent while I was in the Scarlet Moon Empire, added Laszlo. A bit frustrated, Alinda told him, So Laszlo, you're about my age, but you have seen all these amazing things and visited all these cool places. And yet, here I am the same age basically and I've hardly ever been outside of Sulfalena, let alone the country. I'm so envious of you. Ha ha. Listen to me. I must sound so pathetic and naive. Yes, let's feel bad for the poor little princess, how hard her life must be. She can't travel abroad. She said this last part in a mocking, sarcastic way directed at herself. Then, she tried to apologize for saying such things. Laszlo tried to reassure her, No, it's fine really. In fact, well you see, he said with a bit of awkward hesitation in his voice, I am not quite as young as you may think I am. Alinda's face became confused again. She wasn't really sure by what he meant with his words just now. He after all looked around her age, maybe 1 or 2 years older at most she thought. But now her thoughts were now on something he had said before, but she had only just now realized it. She asked him in a confused voice, Wait. Father told me that the island nations war had been fought when he was like my age. That was almost 30 years ago. But you said that you, Tanya, and Desmond had fought in it, right? How can that be? I mean they are old enough sure. But you weren't even born when that war was being fought. Were you? Are you lying to me? Or were you alive back then too? They had stopped walking now along the path that led further upstream beyond the waterfall. Both were now looking at each other. Laszlo was speechless and at a loss for words. Alinda was. He could tell, now growing impatient. She started tapping her foot waiting for a response. Laszlo spoke up at last saying, "I am not lying. I did fight. I mean I was born. Look. All right," he said, letting out a deep and heavy sigh. "It's complicated. Very complicated." Alinda thought now would finally be the right time to ask the question she had been dying to ask him all day. "Does it have anything to do with that strange rune in your left hand?" She was now using her own left hand and finger to point at his left hand. "That rune, you used it to summon that unholy angel, which saved us and destroyed those crazy Nethergate people. Am I right?" she asked, letting out a deep breath of her own, finally happy to get that question out of her system. Again, Laszlo, who had led thousands of troops into battle, fought monsters of every kind, and had told plenty of people about his true rune over his many years, suddenly found himself dumbstruck and unable to think or speak in a way he desired to address this woman's questions. Finally, it just came out of him, "Yes, it does. You see, this rune in my left hand is one of the 20 Seth." Before Laszlo could finish his sentence, they heard many loud noises back to back. The first was like a tree branch snapping. Then they heard something like a young girl screaming, and finally a splash into the river beside them. Laszlo had out of instinct reached for his weapons and was looking up at the trees, when Alinda's pointing toward the river redirected his gaze. There before them was a person struggling to stay afloat in the water. Two things became obvious immediately to Laszlo. One, this person didn't know how to swim. Second, it looked like a child in the water. Not missing a beat, he dropped his swords on the ground and took off. He dived into the water and began swimming as quickly as he could toward the child, which he could now make out as a young boy. The child was frantically flailing his arms and legs trying to stay above water. Just as Laszlo got close enough to grab him, he missed the boy's outstretched hand by mere inches as the boy finally slipped under the water due to the powerful moving current of the mighty Fatuous River. Laszlo could hear Alinda yelling something to him back from the shore but couldn't make it out. He didn't have time. He took a deep breath of air and dove under the water as well. He could see the boy about a meter to his right. He took off quickly in that direction. The boy was no longer moving as much. He wasted most of his energy above the surface. He was awake, barely. Laszlo could see he was fading, not having taken a breath before he had been pulled under. Laszlo reached and finally just barely got close enough. He had done it. He grabbed the boy's hand. Then he grabbed his other arm with a firm grip with his other free hand. Letting go of the hand since he now had the boy's arm, he began making his way back up to the top. As the two broke surface, they started breathing heavily. Oxygen, at last, was now entering the boy's starving lungs. Laszlo looked up at Alinda, who was still yelling something at him. But with the loud sounds of the current and the boy now coughing and gasping for air, he still couldn't hear her. Then he saw her point downriver. He looked in the direction she was pointing. The waterfall. It was barely 30 meters ahead of them and they were approaching it fast. Laszlo took the boy by the arm again, and began paddling with all his might upstream, trying to get away from the falls. Though the waterfall was not that high, however, many sharp rocks were below and any one of them would be enough to kill them both. Alinda had been screaming out of the top of her lungs about the waterfall, but he had not heard her from the sound of rushing current, she reasoned. But now, she could tell he had noticed it and was trying to make his way back to shore with the boy. She wished there was something she could do to help. If only she had a rope or something, she thought to herself. Then, she saw something odd floating on the bank. It was a long tree branch. This must have been the wood she heard cracking before the splash. She ran for the bank and grabbed the branch. It was heavier than it looked, but she tried with all her might and managed to lift it from the water. She turned it around and held it out into the current for the islander to grab when he got close enough. Sure enough, seconds after extending the branch, she felt a pull. Laszlo had the boy in one hand and the branch in the other. Pulling again with all her might, she managed to help pull them ashore with no more than about 20 feet from the edge. Alinda fell back on her bottom from pulling so hard. Laszlo and the boy both collapsed onto the bank, both exhausted, and trying to catch their breath. After a few minutes the three sat up. Laszlo and Alinda were shocked when they looked over at the child. He had long blue hair and pointy ears. "You're an elf child," said Laszlo, and then added, "What were you doing?" Before the young elf lad could answer, another elf child, a female, came running out of the brush. She made a beeline for the boy elf. She started speaking very fast and yelled at him, "I told you. I told you it was too dangerous. I told you it was too dangerous, Oro. But no, you didn't listen to me. You never listened to me. Just wait until your father hears about this. Wait. Now I am going to get in trouble too. You jerk. Why did you get me into trouble? Your dad said we had to stay in the village with all the strange dark magic we've been feeling these last few days. Why do I even follow you and your crazy ideas? Let's spy on these humans. They'll never know," she said in a mocking, mimicking voice. Ridiculous. It was a horrible idea. You nearly died. And oh my, this human saved your life. Oh, my. She finally stopped talking long enough for Alinda to finally speak up, addressing the young female elf. "Wait, you're the girl who we heard screaming before he fell into the water, aren't you?" Laszlo then interjected, "Why were you spying on us?" The young elf boy named Oro spoke up finally. Looking at his female companion, Terra, "Let's get the heck out of here," he stated quickly. With that he grabbed her by the hand and the two took off running into the woods. The two humans tried to pursue them a bit, but it was pointless. Once they got to a certain part in the woods, it's like they suddenly just disappeared, observed the Falena royal family member. The dual sword master then replied, "Elvish magic, probably. They're really good at creating spells to hide themselves. Most elves don't like to concern themselves with the world of men, so just seeing one is strange. But to see elf children, that's just another rare thing entirely. I guess your dad's stories about the elves were true after all." "Amazing," chimed in the silver-hair noble. Laszlo, still soaked and wet, walked over to his swords, picked them up, and placed them back in their sheaths. Looking up at the sun, they both knew they needed to head back to Luna's before her uncle got worried. However, she had not forgotten about her questions. She still wanted to know, but reasoned now wasn't the best time after all. Alinda could not help but think about this man walking beside her. Just yesterday he had saved her life. He fought with such passion and abilities that it had even left her battle-seasoned bodyguard Rose in awe. She knew without him being there, Rose would be dead and maybe even herself. He saved her life and that of her best friend. And now, he had just dived into a raging torrent of water to save someone he didn't even know without a second thought or concern for his own safety. That waterfall could have killed them, but he didn't care. He saved that elf boy's life. At this moment, she was really in awe at this foreign ambassador from the Island Nations Federation. There was certainly something mysterious about him. Alinda decided during the walk back that evening that she wanted to know the truth now more than ever. Who was this Laszlo person? And maybe more importantly, she asked herself, what are these feelings she's starting to have for him? Is it mere infatuation? Or is it something more? "Well now, that is strange indeed," said the voice of a sagely older woman. A bright orange that had moments before filled the whole room had now faded save for one area of the room, on Syra's left hand, which was now pulsating with power and light as a new crest had formed. It was the Twilight Rune, one of the 3 great runes of Falena. "I can feel its power flowing through me. It feels warm, but dangerous like a fire rune, just only everything is far more powerful. But it doesn't feel odd or even difficult to control like the Dawn Rune did months ago. That one felt warm as well, but in a compassionate sort of way like a water rune. It's hard to put into words. But with the Dawn it took much effort to control that rune at first, not like this one. This one it feels so natural," the princess said to the aged rune mistress. The older woman smiled, saying, "No, I understand entirely. Runes are a finicky force of nature. The dawn and the twilight runes are twins, you see, and act as vanguards to the mighty sun rune. As the future queen, you may need to one day bear that awesome and terrible power that is the sun rune, but before you can do that you must have borne both the dawn and twilight runes in your body at least once. Besides, it is better this way anyhow, as each of these solar runes will give you a taste of what bearing the sun rune must surely be like. The nurturing nature of the dawn rune and fierce fiery nature of the twilight rune. Yes, I imagine both in their own way prepare you for the sun rune's awesome power." Syra looked puzzled. "This rune went on me of its own accord. It chose me the moment I walked into the room. How can that be? The rune master at the East Palace had to use his runic arts to forcefully embed the dawn rune in me for the ritual. If these runes are twins, why did this one react so differently to me?" Again, the old rune sage smiled, happy to share her vast knowledge with one so young. "As I said before, your majesty, runes are finicky things. Mysterious. Even folks like me who studied them nearly my whole life, don't know everything about them. However, I can tell you, the greater their power, the greater their wills. You see, only the 27 true runes can truly exercise complete autonomy and choose their host freely. No rune mistress, no matter how talented, can change their will, as my old master Miss Jean used to tell us apprentices, many years ago." The old rune sage continued, "By contrast, weaker runes like a fire or wind have no real strong wills of their own. As I said earlier, their magic is just nothing compared to a true rune. However, there are some very special runes in this world, like the dawn and twilight, which are far more powerful than any common elemental runes. These special runes are capable of performing some amazing and deadly spells. The breadth of their power is great indeed, however the depths of their magic fail to reach the echelons of the true runes." Now the next queen's interest was piqued as she enjoyed hearing stories about powerful runes. Indeed, the 27 true runes are quite literally in a class all themselves. But as for your question about why the twilight chose you and why the dawn rune didn't, such things are not unheard of in the Falanin royal family. Why, as I recall, the dawn rune went right on to your grandmother with no issues, but the twilight had to be placed on her with magic. Kind of the opposite of you, I suppose. Whereas if memory serves me, neither rune went on your mother freely, both had to be forced on with magic to complete the rituals. And reading from journals of my past predecessors, your mother and many other of the women in your family who became queen, had to have the runes placed on them by the sage. Yes, indeed, they were more the rule. And moments like this, with you or your grandmother getting chosen freely by one of the two runes. No, you are the exception, my lady." Syra now had some better understanding, but now felt she was in trouble. She felt like she had opened Pandora's box, because the old woman kept on talking. She continued, "Yes indeed, these two solar runes are part of that special and unique class on the runic hierarchy. As they are very powerful. They have strong wills. Yet, they aren't so powerful that gifted sage mistresses, such as myself, can't overcome that will with our arts and skills. That doesn't mean you could just use its power freely, however. For example, I have no doubt about it that you could wield the twilight with great mastery and ease, and the rune would let you exploit its power to the fullest since it chose you. But I doubt that would be the case with the dawn rune. As it had to be placed on you, against its will. I doubt you could effectively wield it to its fullest strength. So, while, yes, with our arts, we sage masters can help you complete the royal rituals and traditions necessary to help you ascend to the throne. But even we have our limits with these twin solar runes. I guess you could say while these runes don't have a complete free will of their own, like say the sun rune or the night rune, they are however powerful enough to express preference. Yes, I think preference is a good word to use. I really need to write this down before I forget. They may not always be able to choose their host, but they can express a certain degree of preference about who their host is and how much of their power they are willing to share with that person. Such a mysterious force of nature these runes are. It reminds me of a time. She finished, before the princess interrupted her. Syra had heard enough. While yes, she found the topic interesting, she had to admit, she also had other things on her mind. So stopping the old rune master from tangenting off onto another story, she redirected her back to the moment and task at hand, completing the ritual. Outside the shrine, Marcus and Aelin were waiting for the rite to conclude so they may finally return to the Sun Palace, and then Marcus and Aelin could be off to the East Palace to start negotiations with the diplomats from the island nations, whom both were interested in meeting. Particularly, since they had received a message from Grass explaining about all the events since their arrival and his impressions about the three visitors. His impressions about the youngest of the three ambassadors had intrigued Aelin the most, and now he too was very interested in meeting the young man indeed. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted, when Godwyn spoke up. "How much longer do you figure she'll be in there?" "It's been nearly 4 hours. The commander chuckled a little to himself and then replied, "You know, I asked that very same question of my father-in-law when I was in your place then waiting for Elimark to finish her rite of passage here." Marcus replied back, "Oh, really? And what did the former commander of the Queen's Knights tell you?" "He said to me, 'Son, the strongest of all warriors are these two, time and patience. If you want to be a great commander of the Queen's Knights, Aelin, you must first master these two things. In fact, a man who is a master of patience is a master of everything else.'" The nobleman remained silent for a moment and thought. Then he said, "There is much wisdom in these words. Thank you, my lord, for sharing them with me." "Not at all, you're welcome. I'm sure a day will come when you'll be here in my spot, sharing that same advice with your successor," added the warrior poet. At that same moment, the doors to the shrine opened and out stepped Syra, looking tired, but having a satisfactory look on her face. Aelin spoke first. "So, I take it everything went well?" "Yes, it did indeed, father," she replied. Godwyn spoke up now. "If my lady is exhausted, we'll make our journey for Sulfalena in the morning." The older princess answered, "Yes, that would be ideal. I'm very drained from everything today." Godwyn then went to inform the staff they'd be staying one more night at West Palace. The father and daughter pair made their way back to the estate. On the way, she told him of all that had happened to her in the shrine with the twilight rune. As the vermilion-colored sky faded into the nothingness of the darkness, millions of stars began to shine forth from the night sky. Around midnight, as most of the candles were now being extinguished in West Palace, save one, which was in Lord Godwyn's room. Marcus was still awake, drinking some of his favorite wine in a beautifully crafted glass chalice. He was hoping that maybe Syra would pay him another late-night visit. He had so thoroughly enjoyed their last rendezvous that he had thought of very little since. He had been with other women before, of course. He was rich and good-looking after all. He could have nearly any woman he wanted. In fact, he very much had done just that for years while he lived in Stormfist. Yet, that night with Syra, he had felt more intense passion and raw energy than he had with any woman he had ever been with before. He, being a great magician, likened it to having unleashed the full power of 3 Thunderunes at the same time. It was electrifying. Suddenly, Godwyn's attention, which had focused upon his own unusual fantasies, was suddenly brought back to the real world as a shadow began moving in a corner. This obscure figure stepped forth from the darkness. "Sir, my master wanted me to inform you, phase 2 of the plan has failed." "What? How?" shouted Godwyn a bit too loud, he realized. He didn't want to draw any attention from any palace staff who may be walking around outside his room. So he lowered his voice a bit. But still clearly enraged, he railed against this dark-hooded figure. "How did it happen? I was told you were the best. The most highly trained. You never failed, I was assured. There were supposed to be nearly 30 of you. You mean to tell me you couldn't kill one measly woman and take the other teenage girl hostage?" The cloaked man spoke up again. "She wasn't alone, there was another with her and her bodyguard." He was a great warrior and apparently he used some kind of powerful magic that obliterated my men. Only 2 managed to get away alive, because they had been left for dead. One had his skull nearly cracked open and the other had a broken hand, but they still managed to escape before this unknown warrior unleashed his devastating magical attack. The shadowy man added. "I see," retorted Godwin. His anger now seemed abated for the moment as his voice returned to normal. "Fine. Go and tell your master that we'll have to put phase 2 and 4 on hold for now. But there is still no reason we can't move onward with phase 3 of the plan. Now go." Godwin turned around and reached for his drink and took a large gulp. When he turned back around, the hooded figure was gone. He had vanished into the shadows as mysteriously as he had appeared. Godwin was still upset and took his nearly empty glass of wine and threw it forcefully into the fireplace. It shattered instantly against the brick wall and burning logs. The glowing embers were nearly dead, but with the remaining alcohol pouring forth onto the burnt logs it caught fire, briefly filling the room with a pale glowing orange light for a few moments. But then the fire died out and the room was dark again. Aelin's words about a man not being master of all things until he first could master his own patience came echoing back to Marcus's mind. He muttered to himself in a whispery tone, "Damn you, old man." After a few deep sighs, Godwin laid down in his bed. Now he was alone in the dark cold silence of his room with only his, equally dark and cold thoughts for company. He soon began devising new ways to get what he needed from Princess Olinda as well as this new player in town. This strange man that had apparently had great powers, Godwin was suddenly deeply interested in learning more about him.